In this task, you'll be looking at the metadata part of spatial data. When data is purchased or published online by an agency or an organization, we expect to have complete data. This includes the spatial data, the features, the attribute data, and the metadata. Metadata is basically data about data, and it's one sure way we can understand the source of the data set, how it was created, what scale it was created at, what the spatial reference is, what kinds of accuracy we can expect, etc. All data sets have some error associated with them. After all, they're models of the real world. They're not actually the real world. They have some scale associated with them. So we need to be able to determine if a data set's accuracy and scale is acceptable. This is why metadata is so crucially important when using other people's data or providing data to others. So here I have QGIS Desktop open with the U.S. Census Metropolitan Areas of New Mexico shapefile loaded. So as you've seen in previous labs, I can double click on the layer and open up the layer properties and go to the metadata tab and see something called metadata about this layer. However, this form of metadata is really just basic features of the layer rather than actual metadata. Metadata itself is a U.S. federal standard maintained by the Federal Geographic Data Committee. One of the files that composes a shapefile is a metadata file, and it can have several forms. It can be a text file, HTML, or XML. And these files can be opened in a text editor or a web browser and read. However, there's also a QGIS plugin to read and edit metadata files. So I'm going to close this layer properties. I'm going to go to the plugins, manage and install plugins to open up the plugin manager. This is an experimental plugin at this point that we're going to be using. So I need to go to settings and make sure that show also experimental plugins is checked. And then I can go to the All tab and search for Meta. And what we're looking for is this one called Meta Tools. If it's not installed, simply select it and hit Install Plugin. Here it's already installed, so I'm just going to enable it by checking the box and click Close. So this plugin manifests itself as this nice little toolbar with several buttons. And it's still an experimental plugin at this point, but it's a really well-conceived and very useful plugin still. One note about this, if you're on a Windows machine, you need to have the Python console open for this plugin to operate successfully. So to turn that on, simply go to Plugins, Python console. And it just opens up a small window down here that's going to receive output from the plugin. So to see how this works, I'm going to select my layer. I'm going to click on the View Metadata button. And the metadata viewer opens up, and I can expand it so I can see the record a little bit better. So this basically parses the metadata XML file and puts it into a much more user-friendly readable format than raw XML. So the FGDC metadata standard has 6 major sections, and one nice thing about having a standard is every metadata file that you open will always have these 6 sections, and they'll always be in the same order. So the first few times you look at metadata, it's going to look like Greek. There's a lot there, but as you get familiar with it, it'll always be in that same order, so it becomes easy to work with. That's the value of having a standard. So the 6 sections are the identification information, and this is going to be the data title and the abstract of the data. The next section is data quality information, which would be information about the accuracy and precision of the data, including processing steps taken to produce it. The next section is spatial organization, which is information about the file format. The next section is spatial reference information, which is the coordinate reference system used, including projection, coordinate system, datum, and other parameters. The fifth section is entity and attribute information, which gives you explanations on the field types and the data contained within each attribute column. And the last section is distribution information, which is contact information of the data provider. So if you have more questions, you can find out who to contact. Let's get into this metadata viewer a little bit more. I'll click on the description, and I'll see an abstract and a purpose for the data set. These same 6 sections are across the top. And one thing, this plugin is, it is experimental. It's not working quite as well as it could in parsing the XML file. If I click on data quality, I don't see anything. And it's not that the data quality is missing, it's just this plugin is not parsing the XML file properly. So since we're not getting any data quality information here, let's just look at the raw XML metadata file. So I'm going to open up Windows Explorer and I'm going to find the XML file. I'm just going to double click on it. Any operating system should have some default program that is set up to read XML. Here it's Microsoft Internet Explorer. And this is certainly harder to look at than the parse display in Meta Tools. Fortunately, all the metadata files have the same sections in the same order as I mentioned before. With some experience, you can scroll through this and find the information you need. So for example, here at the very beginning is the abstract and the purpose that we saw already. If I scroll down a little bit, and this is all arranged hierarchically, I'll come to the data quality section. And here's the logical consistency report. So here's some information about the data set and how it was produced and the kind of accuracy you may be able to expect with it. Slightly farther down, I'll find the attribute section right here with the ATTR tag. This section will detail all the attribute columns. And while everyone should complete their metadata records with all these descriptions, sometimes this is one of the sections you'll find that people haven't completed. Metadata is one of those things that no one really enjoys creating. It's laborious and time consuming, but you'll appreciate it when someone else has created a very nice metadata file for you to use so that you can interpret the data that you've obtained from them. So it's a very valuable thing to both produce and use. So here we can see a column called place FP10, and it describes the contents of that column here. So this can be very useful also for code sometimes. A column may have codes in it that we don't understand, and we can refer to the metadata hopefully to figure out what those codes represent. Okay, so I'll minimize this and bring up QGIS Desktop again. I'm going to close the metadata viewer. And I'm going to click on this button with the little pencil on it, Edit Metadata. So this brings up the metadata editor. So with this, I could actually go in and add to this metadata record or use it as a template to create a metadata record for another data set if I wanted to. So if I expand the data quality section, I'll see that logical consistency report. So it's in the metadata record, and this tool is parsing the file and finding that information while the metadata viewer wasn't. So again, we're dealing likely with an issue here of the experimental nature of this plugin. Hopefully future versions of this will be more functional than this is at the moment, but it's still a very nice, useful tool. I'll close this. And finally, the import and export buttons allow you to save out a copy of the metadata or import a metadata template and start editing it in here. Many organizations will set up a metadata template with items that'll be the same from metadata file to metadata file, such as contact information. So if you have such a template, you can use the import tool here to import that metadata template and then use the metadata editor to complete the record. In the next task, we'll work with data aggregation.